Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how successful organizations automate their GDPR processes. My name is Nora Ottesen-Rinnan, and I will be your moderator today. I'm managing the marketing here at Fujitsu ServiceNow practice, and I'm excited to be introducing to you the session today. In this webinar, we will show you how you can automate your GDPR processes with the GDPR moderator from Wrangu. Today's speaker will be Jenny Stig from Wrangu and our own Vegard Porsedal from the Fujitsu ServiceNow practice. First, I have a few practicalities I would like to cover, and I will also do a short introduction to our Fujitsu ServiceNow practice. This webinar is scheduled to last for 45 minutes with a Q&A session in the end. You will all be muted throughout the webinar to avoid any interruptions. If you want to ask questions, please submit these by using the section called Questions in the menu on your right side of the screen. We will do as many questions as possible within the time frame in the end. If your question is not answered, we will contact you with the answer after the webinar has ended. Within the next days, you will receive an email with the slides and a recording of this presentation. So, starting now with the introduction of our practice. Fujitsu is a gold sales and services partner of ServiceNow, and we have experience from more than 800 ServiceNow projects across Europe during the last 9 years. Wrangu is a partner of today's GDPR solution who can offer added value to ServiceNow users. We have a current customer satisfaction score of 8.8, and we are constantly striving to serve our customers in the very best way. Fujitsu is the 7th largest IT service provider in the world, and we have more than 400 trained ServiceNow resources globally, with the majority of these in Europe. ServiceNow is an important area to Fujitsu, and we have ambitions to grow rapidly during the next coming years. Fujitsu is a full lifecycle partner of ServiceNow, and we deliver end-to-end services from consulting, add-on solutions, implementations, training, and support. This year, we were awarded IT Workflow Partner of the Year, both for EMEA and globally, as well as Partner of the Year in Asia Pacific. With this short introduction, I will hand the word over to Jenny, who will introduce Wrangu and show you the GDPR moderator solution.
So just like Fujitsu, we're a ServiceNow partner. I think the biggest difference is that we are specialized in the data governance and privacy area. And so what we do is actually we implement the ServiceNow GRC, SecOps, vendor risk management modules, and we build our own applications on the platform that are designed to help you in your data governance and privacy challenges. So what I'm going to show you today is the Gdpr Accelerator that we built and that we launched via the ServiceNow store approximately a year and a bit ago, so before the GDPR legislation went live. So I'm going to jump over right into the application to show you the scope of it. So what you see here is a data privacy portal that is really meant for your data privacy team to work in. So it should support all the daily processes that your team works on, like data protection impact assessments that come in. You work on the data subject rights, register your records of processing activities, have a register for your data breaches, and those are the main processes that we support. All of that is built on the ServiceNow platform, which means that it seamlessly integrates with all the other modules of ServiceNow, meaning that we use some of the core data and leverage that core data that you already have in your platform, and we enhance it really with the processes that support the GDPR legislation. So what you're seeing is the data privacy portal, and first of all, I'm going to show you the dashboard that gives you an overview actually of the state of the GDPR processes that you have at the moment in your organization. So it shows you how many data subjects requests you have, for example, but also, is there anything I need to do on my records of processing activities? Do I have active data breaches? What about my personal assets? So it can just show you that one overview. The other thing we offer in the application is an interactive dashboard. This one shows you an even more consolidated view of GDPR within the ServiceNow platform. So what we're doing in here is really bundling the data that comes from our Gdpr Accelerator together with the platform information. That means, for example, that we can show compliance with the GDPR legislation, or that we can show incidents or potential planned changes that could affect configuration items or applications that contain personal data assets. For the demo of this Gdpr Accelerator, what I want to do is I want to just guide you through the different processes, starting with your DPIA, as this is really the thing that should be embedded in your organization as to support privacy by design. So every new project now should start with at least a screening that can determine then if you have to run through the full DPIA assessment or not. If I'm going to start a new DPIA, it really starts the DPIA screening process. I have, for example, a new corporate credit card. It's a new project, and as you can see, because it's a platform, you can either associate it with a new project, with an existing project that is already in your ServiceNow instance, or with an existing asset, meaning a CI that is available in your CMDB. So in that case, it's a new project. You have to define your data subject type. In that case, it is something for employees, that new project. You can choose one or many. All of those choice lists are incorporated within our application, but of course, they can be configured or adjusted to the needs of your own organization. So if I choose the employee one, we'll have myself to approve it. And I have to define, so why am I starting this process? Why am I really processing the data that I'm collecting in this one? In that case, it is a service delivery. Again, it's a choice list that can be modified to the needs of your organization. Following this, there is a short screening questionnaire actually that has the ability to determine if you have to go through the full assessment or not. And this is all based on the answers that you're given. So there are two sections. One is about just the processing of data, and one is about the high risk activities that are involved in the processing of that specific data. And in that case, if you answer two or more questions of the upper part with yes, or one question of the lower part, it will advise you to perform the complete DPIA. So just to show you, I'm going to answer a few of the questions, some of them with yes or no. I have answered now more than two, of course, of the upper part with yes. Gonna answer no to all of the high risk areas. So it's not a project that will involve high risk regarding the processing of personal data, but it does process the data in such a way that a full DPIA according to the legislation should be required. So once I submit this one, you will see that that the process is started. Started with a screening, it'll go into the information flow process where, if applicable, you'd have to answer that full DPIA assessment, then go into the risk assessment, and of course, somebody has to give an approval if the DPIA has been performed correctly. So if I look at the results of the screening, it gives me the recommendation that a DPIA is required based on the following screening outcomes. So based on my answers given to those questions. As the evaluating party at that moment, so that could be, for example, your DPO, I always have the chance to say, well, from my perspective, I don't think that the DPIA is really required. So I could override that recommendation with the DPIA being not required. But of course, I would have to give a justification so that in your organization, at least it's captured in a consistent way for as why you haven't done a DPIA for a certain product. In that case, I'm going to support that, that recommendation, and I say a full DPIA is required at that point. Once I've done that, a task is created so that a full DPI can be performed. And I'm going to go to one that is already I've just created. Say, okay, open it. This would be information as to who this full assessment and as to who the risk evaluation would be assigned. In your organization, that would be information that is probably already predefined. It would be the risk manager who would perform the risk assessment. The information owner could be the one who is responsible, for example, for a certain type of information within your organization or within a certain part of the organization. A reviewer might be your data privacy officer, and a validation group is the group who actually reviews that full assessment, and that might be somebody from your data privacy team. And I'm going to choose to assess that one now. I'm not going to run through the full assessment because you all know probably that the full assessment has a whole number of different questions. I'm just going to show you the different areas. So it's really about the purpose of the project. It's about what kind of data you store, how you store it, what your relationship with the data subject is. Did you consider the data subject rights? Did you identify them? Did you tell your data subjects on how to perform those rights? Do you have a lawful basis of processing that data? In case you're processing special data, there are other lawful grounds as if you're allowed to process that data. Other part that is, of course, important, if you're going to share that data with a third party. If you do, you have to, for example, have the right data processing agreements in place. And the context is really about, did you make sure that the right people were informed? Are there any concerns? Do the data subjects really know that you are processing the data? And consultation is very much about consulting or informing stakeholders, the DPO, and the data subjects themselves. This questionnaire is also part of the Gdpr Accelerator. So this is a standard DPIA questionnaire. Of course, it is possible to modify this, add maybe some other questions that are important for your organization, but this should cover everything that legislation asks from you to answer in that assessment. As I don't want to type everything, I'm going to go to an assessment that has already been filled in. At that stage, I'm going to submit it. And the next stage would be that validation step where somebody goes in and looks at the whole assessment and has a look at, did I answer everything correctly? Do I have any comments, for example, on answers? And at that point, there are two things happen actually in the application. Based on the answers that I have given, so this is a filled-in questionnaire now that I've done, there are certain concerns that have been created automatically. And those concerns are really just a reminder that you haven't done the things that you were supposed to do actually before you start that project. So in that case, for example, I answered the question, did I consult the DPO before starting the project, with no. And this is raised as an automatic concern because that is something, if you do the privacy by design piece, you should consult your DPO in a project like that. So the option is to have those concerns that are automatically generated based on the answers given, but you can also add concerns manually at that stage, and concerns can have different categories, and they do have their own process, and somebody has to follow up on them. So you can choose to not finalize the DPIA before concerns have been closed. The other option at that point is, if I go back to my process, so I have the concerns that I can either manually or automatically add, and you can see they are added to that DPIA. The other part is that I can add action tasks, and these are really like tasks that are assigned to, for example, to my IT organization, to tell them we're introducing a new system and I've seen that encryption is not so great. Could you please look into an alternative, for example? And again, an action type can be a meeting, a notification, a task, something that somebody has to do in order to finish that DPIA. So normally you shouldn't be able to complete that DPIA apart if any concerns or action tasks are open, because these are really important things that have to be put in place or have to be answered before a project goes live. Last step of the DPIA, so once you've gone through the initial screening, through the assessment, the validation stage, and all the concerns have been raised, action tasks have been sent to people, it'll go in the risk evaluation phase. And this is really the point where your privacy risk manager or your DPO would say, so what does that mean? What risk does it generate for the data subject if that data is exposed, for example? So what is the likelihood and what is the impact? And this creates, of course, a risk. And a risk has to be treated by a certain point in time. So you can describe the risk, you can provide a risk treatment. And the other option that you have, if you are using ServiceNow's risk management, you can also raise a risk in the central risk register automatically from the risk evaluation stage in the DPIA. Once this process step is finished, the last step is that somebody has to review it. Somebody has the end responsibility and has to say that all the relevant processes are in place. I've given that privacy notice. Limitation measures are in place. So just the last review step really on saying, yes, we've followed the process as it should, and the project can eventually go live. So that, in very short, is the DPIA process. Once an organization has performed that DPIA, then a project is really spun up, and at a certain point, everything is put into production. And that is, of course, the point in time where you have to have a record of processing activities for to capture actually what data you are collecting, for what purpose, and so forth. So that's where the next module actually comes in place, and this is your ROPA management. For records of processing activities, so for the Article 30, there are two different roles, of course. You can be the data controller, so the person who's really responsible and defines how data has to be treated, how data has to be stored, under which conditions, and so forth. Or you can be the processor, where you process that data on behalf of your controller. So we have two different options to create that ROPA, and that is either as being a controller, so having the full responsibility on defining what happens to that data. So you see that this is quite a long form, or you are a processor, where you have to process the data for the controller and you have to comply with the rules that the controller actually sets. So some of the fields are not available, of course, then for a processor. I will go to a record of processing activities that has been created before, so I'm not going to have to type all of it. So let me go through one that is created to introduce a new CCTV system within an organization. So you can see again, a record of processing activities has a process to it. So you create it in a draft stage. Somebody reviews it afterwards, and then it goes into a monitor stage, which is like a status quo where the ROPA is used. So that whole process is in use in the organization. And in that stage, it can also be triggered. For example, if something would change in your infrastructure and all of a sudden you decide to add other data items, for example, to a process, then you could put it back into the review stage. So somebody has to add new data, for example, and enhance that record of processing activities. So if I go to the different parts, of the ROPA. Again, you have an activity, you have a purpose on why you process that data, and you have one or many data subject types. For those data subject types, you process certain types of data, of course. Again, all of those are choice lists, so you can add several data types actually that are applicable to your organization. And some of them are marked as being special categories of personal data. So in our example, for example, biometric data is considered, or we have marked as being special category of data. That's why this checkbox is already marked. The other point is that we can now connect this record of processing activities actually to the ServiceNow CMDB. So this is where we can then choose a business service or a process that is connected to that record of processing activities. Somebody is, as I am the, might be my controller, might be the controller. So this is the company, who's the representative. Are there any joint controllers? So for example, what you often see is that several departments or several units within an organization are joint controllers of a process, and you might want to capture that. Who is your DPO? Again, that might be information that might be auto-populated, for example, based on the country that you're located in. You might have different data protection officers per country. Next thing you have to define in your record of processing activities is the lawful basis on why you process personal data. Again, we're offering choice lists, and as you can see, we've chosen consent from the data subject. And consent means that I have to say a little bit about the consent. That's why this next step, for example, is created. Other options include things like a legitimate interest. And once I would choose legitimate interest, there's another step, because you have to perform that legitimate interest assessment to be able to choose that as your lawful basis of processing the data. Because I have chosen that biometric data as well as one part to process, you can see that another question actually appears, of course, because the conditions for processing that special category of data is different from just your normal lawful basis of processing data. So again, you'd have to define that one. In the consent part, it's really how did you obtain that consent? Because it could be a checkbox that somebody marked, or it could be that they signed a contract with you. So that information has to be given, but also information about the withdrawal process, because if somebody gives the consent, of course, you also have to give them the option to withdraw that consent in an easy way. Data transfer activities are really about, do you transfer that data to any processes outside your organization, any processes outside the country? And what we can do in the application is we can actually go very gradually to define where certain data is processed or transferred to. So again, we have only one data subject type, and we have defined those 3 types of data that we're transferring. So I can say that last name is actually transferred to a controller, to another controller, and what is my relationship with a controller, and is it transferred, for example, to another country? If so, you have to define the country and define if you have the safeguards in place to do so. It's going to be if I go back to the parent record, so to the complete ROPA, you can see that that one is actually added as a data transfer item. And the other option that we can find at that point are storage and retention rules. So this one goes much more into your own CMDB actually. So you're defining on which configuration item actually that specific data type is processed. So in that case, I can say my first name is processed on a certain CI within my CMDB, and I could add, if I have them, my retention and erasure details. This gives me really the option to know very gradually on where data is stored and processed within my organization. So these were the data transfer and the security tab, where you can really define where the data goes on an individual data item basis. Last but not least is just the record management bit, and this is really who's going to review that record of processing activities. In that case, I've chosen the data privacy team. Once it is filled in, it can be saved and it'll go into a review stage. And as I said, after it's reviewed and approved, and once you don't need that process anymore, you can retire the record of processing activities, but you will always have, of course, that archive of what kind of ropers did you have. Of course, it also gives you, as it's all stored on the platform, an overview of all records of processing activities that you have within your organization. So those two, especially the roper, are really the basis actually of your GDPR processes in the organization and link in very, very closely to the whole ServiceNow platform. I just want to touch briefly the data breach register and the data subject rights. So the data breach register is really, it is not like a security operations module where you would triage something that happened in your organization. It is really meant to provide you that overview of what is going on in your organization. Did we have any data breaches? Did they contain any personal data? So was any personal data compromised? And it can also help you to stay within the timelines, because for a data breach, once it's been acknowledged as being a GDPR related, so data breach, so personal data has been compromised, unfortunately, you only have 72 hours time to inform the right people. So we have an SLA, of course, that starts at the moment you acknowledge that it is a data breach, and it will send out notifications so your team is aware. And this data breach register really gives you the option to capture all the data that you need to eventually report to the authorities and that you need to capture within your organization. So one thing is, of course, you have to decide, is there any personal data that has been compromised really? Because it might be, in my case, I found bank account information on a printer. It might be it's publicly known information, or it might be information that is out of date and not applicable anymore. So the other thing is, when did you really become aware of it? Because it might be that I registered it now, but already was aware about it yesterday. And of course, there are different channels that you can be alarmed of it. It can be an external source, an internal source. Maybe you got aware about the potential data breach through media, or one of your data processors told you. So going through that process, it's a process that has to be super fast, of course. So what we see very often is at customers that if a data breach really occurs, everybody has to go in a room. You have a war room, you have legal there, you have management, you might have PR. So all different kinds of people are actually involved in a potential data breach. What we do in the process is we capture actually all that information about how many individuals are affected by that, what type of data did breach, how many records are there, why did it occur, does it have a geographical reach, for example, what is the impact really, is it a confidentiality breach, is it availability of data, are there any risks to the individuals regarding their rights and freedoms, and do we have to report about it? And only then you have to decide actually if you have to inform, of course, the authorities. So have you done that? Have you notified the data subjects? And you can just capture all of those details in one place. The data breach register in the end, of course, gives you that full overview again, what happened in my organizations. And you can see if you had high risk data breaches, for example, within your organization. So in that case, yes, we did have one high risk one, and you will be alarmed if you're not in time responding to them. The data subject rights are really the ones that, for example, your employees, your customers, your former employees can raise to get access to their data, to ask from you to stop processing their data, to withdraw, provide consent. All those access requests are part of the Gdpr Accelerator. And I'm just going to show you one. So what we see is that this is very often filled in by a team member of the data protection team. It is also possible to provide that access in a portal form, for example, or provide an email address so that your end users or your employees can raise that data subject right request. Again, what is important is that that is provided what type of data, what is your communication language, as loads of customers have, of course, a multinational, multilingual environment. And you have to give the information about the data subject. If you're acting on behalf of a subject, so if you're an agent, for example, requesting data on behalf of a data subject, we would also need the information about that agent to be able to process the data. I'm just going to show you one that is already filled in. So we had Diana filling in that data access request, actually. So she wanted access to her data. It's been assigned to the data privacy team. She has a communication language. And as we have a month's time, there's always the option to extend a request if you have a good reason for that extension. And information about that can be automatically then sent to the data subject with the respective reason, of course, on why you would extend that request. In the process of the data subject request, loads of different steps have to be followed, actually. So the request itself has to be validated first. Is it a legitimate request? The data subject itself has to be validated. Is the person really the person who they say they are? And only then is the step actually where you really process the request. And that would be the step where you go into your organization and where you create tasks or tell your organization, hey, Diana wants access to her data, please provide that data. Last step is to inform that the data subject, of course, that the data has been processed. And again, this can be done in their preferred language. So we have the option to communicate through email directly from the data subject request. And that one can be based on different email templates that can be in the language of the data subject. Or you could also choose to have a communication by letter, for example. So there's also customers who send these out in paper form. The last part of the Gdpr Accelerator is actually something that is more like an inquiry and complaint management, because what we've seen in the past is that the DPO team or the data privacy team, they don't only have the GDPR processes to manage, but they are also the point of contact for the organization to ask questions about data privacy, or somebody complains about, I think somebody didn't treat my data well. But it could also be just as simple as, I heard we have a new data privacy policy. What is that all about? And what we see is that that data sometimes just get lost in the organization because it's sent to, for example, an IT service desk. And like this, you have a specific place actually to ask your questions to the DPO team or the data privacy team. And it will be assigned directly to them. And it can have an SLA, of course, so that you can measure on how fast you answer those questions from your employees regarding data privacy. So if I go back to the data privacy portal, you can see again, these are all the different modules that the application is made out of. Of course, there is a backend to it as well with an administration console where you can configure the different options, for example, of the lawful basis. Yeah, all of that together gives you an overview actually to be able to run the processes, report on the processes, leverage the data that you already have in ServiceNow, and really embed those processes in your day-to-day day-to-day business. Okay, I'm going to hand over to my Fujitsu colleagues to tell a little bit about a use case, a customer.
Thank you, Jenny. So one of our customers, or existing ServiceNow customers in Norway, Bertelostem, came to us with a challenge they had with GDPR. As you can see, Bertelostem is an automotive importer, and they also own a lot of car dealership, and they have a lot of customers as well of cars, vans, trucks, buses. They also import other stuff, but as you can see, their challenge was that they knew they had to do something in order to process everything related to GDPR and the articles, but it was very unclear for them how system support for that was supposed to be created. And that is when we proposed to them that they can use the Gdpr Accelerator by our partner Wrangu, because it's not only for Bertelostem but also for other customers that they seem to know that they need to do something in order to become compliant with the rules, but it's difficult to figure out in which system and how those processes are supposed to be conducted. Now, the GdpR Accelerator sort of, to an extent, dictates how you can do that in a proper way. And part of the challenge was also to figure out which of these solutions were most cost efficient. Now, the reason our customers comes to us is because we all deliver ServiceNow from before, and their question is, should we, or their first question is always, can we build something in ServiceNow that can handle the GDPR processes? And our question is, sure, but from a cost perspective and benefit perspective, it's better with the Gdpr Accelerator because you don't have to spend so much time trying to figure out all the requirements, because they are, for this case in Bertelostem, those were very vague. And they did not know exactly how they should define the processes with all the technical requirements, what fields are created, and also the process requirements. How do we handle all of this? They have also done some previous efforts with other external consultancy companies, for example, record of processing activities. And all of those initiatives basically stranded because they ended up with some stale Excel sheets that were outdated almost as soon as they were saved. And they start to distribute it, send it around, it creates it's a mess. So our solution was to do an assessment workshop with them to clarify the scope and evaluate advantages, and also see where did they want to end up with this. And we did several workshops, and in the end, we figured out that the Gdpr Accelerator was best suited for their requirements. That was a mutual discovery between us and Bertelostem. We decided to implement the SAR, ROPA, DPIA, and data breach processes. We chose to separate it into two phases just so that the organization could handle this, because doing all four at once was a bit comprehensive for them. So I think we started with ROPA and subject access request, and in the second phase, which is about to start very soon, we'll do DPIA and data breach. Another thing that was important to Bertelostem was that they were allowed to install the entire application on their existing ServiceNow instance for a 30-day trial. This allowed us to walk through the application with them and further confirm that this covered the requirements. Now, some of the benefits, and we've spent extensive amount of time comparing custom development in ServiceNow versus the GDPR Accelerator and other solutions as well. And this is not unique for Bertelostan, but it's a general argument that we use for all our customers, that the GDPR Accelerator will shorten the time to market for complete processes to handle GDPR cases. It has a lower maintenance cost and actually no development cost, because it's a complete application that is installed from the ServiceNow store, meaning it's certified by ServiceNow as well. We basically install it and configure it. They also commit to introduce new and improved functionality, and they will release it in the same cycle as ServiceNow, meaning 2 times a year. It supports all the relevant GDPR articles. This is also documented in Wrangu's material. It provides high transparency and insight in the GDPR processes, as you could see from Jenny's excellent demo. You can also integrate some of these with other ServiceNow products or existing processes that customers already have in ServiceNow. Jenny mentioned GRC, security operations. You also have links to CMDB and business service portfolio, just to mention a few. Lastly, you have increased cost efficiency of implementation, usage, and maintenance.
Great. Thank you, Vegard. This was all we had for you today. I can see that we are running out of time, but maybe we have, there's one question here. If you are okay with that, Jenny, if I can ask you one question.
Sure.
The question is, does the solution support multi-language?
Yeah, it's the same as the ServiceNow platform, so it has all the capabilities to support multiple languages. And I think I mentioned in the demo as well that we also now support, for example, communication with the data subjects in different languages through different templates.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Can you please take the next slide there? Yeah. So this was all for today. I hope you all found this session useful. As already said in the beginning, you will receive an email with link to the presentation and also the recording of the webinar. If you want to get in touch with us regarding the GDPR moderator from Wrangu, please feel free to contact us. And we frequently host webinars related to the ServiceNow platform, so make sure you follow us on LinkedIn to get the updates or visit our website where you can sign up for our newsletter. I will end this webinar today by wishing you all a great afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.